Okay, everyone, I hope you're all well. What I'm going to do today is two videos. The first one is going to talk about how to do thematic questions. Then the second video I'll do a bit later on will be the first part of Russian government. So the first topic we're going to be looking at, or the next topic we're going to be looking at, is the nature of Russian government. So what you need to do is go on to Moodle. It's called the nature of government or the nature of Russian government, and you'll see there's a lovely student work booklet which you either need to print out or copy and save somewhere. Then you can tippy tap your answers in online, can't you? So what I'm going to talk about in this video, and it's one you probably want to come back to when I take the first essay on this topic, is how to do these thematic questions. Now on the exam, which as you know is a nice lovely 2.5 hour long thing, there's two sections. There's section A or section 1 or whatever it is called, which is the interpretation question. You've already had a go at doing one of these on Alexander II. So this is where you get two interpretations, you get one question, and you got to answer it like you should have done the other week. Those questions will either be on Alexander II, Khrushchev, or the provisional government, and there's no choice as to what it is. The second part of the exam, which should take you an hour and a half to do, there are three 25-mark questions, and you do two out of the three. They will be on the other big topics of the course. So the thematic elements of the course is the nature of Russian government, the economy and society, nationalities, and war, essentially war and revolution. So you may get a thematic question on, say, the government and on war or whatever. Now, the way that you do these questions is that basically you should spend 45 minutes on it. You will probably write, well, you should write at the very least an introduction, 3 big paragraphs, and a conclusion. And each of those paragraphs needs to have a counter argument within it as well. Now, these questions, they cover the entire period. So looking at Russian government, for example, you might get a question on the lines of how far was there more continuity than change in the way Russia was ruled in the period 1855 to 1964. They'll always cover the entire period, okay? What you need to do is compare and contrast within the essay on the given question. Now, things you should never ever do. You should never write it chronologically. You should never have paragraph 1 about Alexander II and paragraph 3 or 4, whatever it is, end up talking about Khrushchev. If you do that, you'll get a U, essentially. What you need to do is you need to kind of always compare kind of Tsarist systems with communist systems or an early period with a later period. You're basically looking for similarities and differences across the period. Now, for the Russian government questions, in some ways they're the easiest ones, although some of the content you might find a little difficult and it's not the easiest to get your head around at first. We suggest that any question about continuity and change on Russian government, your argument should always be there wasn't any. Russian government at the start of the period and at the end of the period was one man running the show. At the beginning of the period, it was a guy called a Tsar. At the end of the period, it was a guy called a General Secretary. And throughout most of the time which we look at, there are a couple of little exceptions. That was the general way which Russia was ruled. So that's probably the best argument you can have for these questions. Now, the way that you answer these questions, whether it's government or war and revolution, or if it's a question on the economy or whatever, is that you need to have themes. Your paragraphs need to deal with themes to help answer that question. So, and the way that we teach it is along various themes within each of the topic areas in order to make that kind of clear for you. So, for most Russian government questions, like the one I just said, was there more change than continuity? We suggest that the 4 themes you should have, and you should discuss at least 3 of these, will be ideology, that should be a paragraph, structure, that can be central or local, okay, or you could do 2 and have both, repression and dealing with opposition, and then you might do a 4th one about the nature of opposition itself. So for any question on Russian government, you do 1 paragraph about ideology. Was it similar? Did it change? Would it stay the same across the period? One on structure, did the structures of the institutions change, or was there more continuity across the period? Did the way the Russian government deal with opposition change, or was it much the same across the period? And did the nature of the opposition change or stay the same across the period? So that's how you should do most Russian government questions. They should be your 3 or 4 paragraphs. Within each one, you'll probably have some counter arguments because, yes, there's great similarity in how all the governments dealt with things, but there was some kind of differences and little periods where there were slight changes that took place. Okay, if you get a question, say, these are in your workbooklet, these couple of questions, you might get a question where they highlight something, like, for example, how far did the communist governments in 1917 show greater change than continuity in Russian government? Or, I don't know, how far did the provisional government of 1917 show more change than continuity? Something like that. If they do highlight something within the question, I still had the same argument. There was no change, but each paragraph would need to refer back to the bit of the question which they've highlighted, the provisional government or the communist regimes or whatever. Okay, hopefully that might become a bit more clearer when we've actually looked at some questions later on. But the general thing is the same. Okay, ideology, structure, repression, nature of opposition, and each paragraph needs to cover the entire period. And I would do each paragraph on the lines of, one similarity in the structure of government can be seen between the Tsarist and the communists was X, and then say how it was similar or different. Alexander did this, whereas Khrushchev did that, or it's that type of stuff. Now, in some ways, in terms of level of detail, you do need to have detailed knowledge. But because you're covering the entire period with these paragraphs, if you're a bit unsure on one question, thinking, I can't quite remember Lenin's economic policy for an economics essay, you just leave him out. As long as you know what Stalin's was, and as long as you know what the Tsarist ones were, the fact you haven't mentioned Lenin as part of your answer, it doesn't really matter. So in that respect, you can go to your strengths really and think, well, I really understand that, I really know that, I can use those two as examples for similarities or whatever. The other type of question you might get is one which is a bit more specific. So again, in your booklet, we put the question on the nature of opposition to Russia's rulers was consistent in the periods 55 to 64. Again, you'd have themes, but you'd have to think, they have to be slightly different themes, and that type of question you might find easy when we've done a few more of the topic areas. But again, your themes would be dealing with the nationalities as an opposition, army, peasants, workers, the elites and the intelligentsia, that type of stuff. So these thematic questions, the basic rules are 45 minutes, introduction, conclusion, and 3 paragraphs. Each one should have a theme. Okay, and as I've just said, for most Russian government questions, especially about change or continuity, your themes will be ideology, structure, repression, opposition. And with that in mind, what we're going to do for teaching the Russian government bit between now and May is we're going to do ideology first of all, then we're going to do structure. I think we're doing repression next, and then we're doing opposition, or it's the way around. But anyway, so the first bit we're going to look at is ideology. Okay, we'll do a week on each one, and hopefully we can then discuss and chat about, or what was chatting, will it be me telling you what were some of the similarities across the period, what were some of the differences for each one. Okay then, any problems, send me an email or whatever. I'll do up my next YouTube video a little bit later on, and it'll have some work attached to it, etc, etc.